Alright, so right now I'm looking at a function called register sidebar. As usual, check out the resource section of this lecture for the link. This function will tell WordPress that we have sidebars we'd like WordPress to be aware of. By doing this, we allow users to customize the sidebar by adding various widgets. If you look at the very short description, WordPress recommends that we use this function in the widget's init action hook. So let's do that. Inside the functions file, let's add this hook under the hooks section and let's call the function juWidgets. Next, let's create a file inside the includes folder called widgets.php and define the function. Lastly, include it from the functions file. Now we can create widget areas for our theme. Let's take a look at the documentation for the register sidebar function. There's only one parameter and it's optional. This function accepts an array. Let's go through this one by one inside the widgets file. So let's call this function and pass it an array. The first key is the name of the sidebar. The name should be readable, short, and concise. I'll be using the double underscore function just like last time since I want to allow users to translate this name if needed. I'm going to call it My First Theme Sidebar. The second key we can set is the ID. We must set an ID or WordPress will throw an error. Before we set the ID, let's go to the codex for a second. Scroll down to the notes and I want you to look at the very first note. WordPress warns us of IDs we should avoid and provides a link of IDs not to use. So let's take a quick look. As you can see, the list is pretty exhaustive. Let's go back to our widget file and let's give our widget a unique ID. One way of making sure we have a unique ID is to prefix our ID with initials like we do with our functions. I'm going to give my sidebar the ID juSidebar. Next is a simple description. I'm going to make this translatable and set it to sidebar for the theme Udemy. I'm going to skip the class key as I don't want to apply any classes. There are a couple more things we should be doing, but I just want to make sure our widgets are working. Go ahead and refresh the page. We should see no errors so far. Let's go to the WordPress dashboard and you should now see a new menu item appear under Appearance called Widgets. Let's check this out quickly. As you can see, WordPress now has created a nice little UI for our sidebar. It takes care of saving and updating the sidebar. Right now, our sidebar is empty, so let's drag and drop some widgets onto the sidebar. After doing so, let's take a look at our site. You'll notice that our widgets aren't loading. This is because we've only registered the sidebar. The next step is to display the sidebar. Before we do that, let's separate our sidebar from our template. Just like the header and footer, sidebars can be put into their own files and can be called with the function getSidebar. The rules for names apply to this function as well. Create a file called sidebar.php. Next, let's completely cut the HTML for the sidebar from our template into the sidebar file. You can find this by looking for the div tag with the class sidebar. It'll also be surrounded by these HTML comments that say sidebar. Once you've pasted that, go back to the index template and call the getSidebar function. Let's go back to the sidebar template. I'm going to actually delete a lot of the HTML inside the div tag and leave it empty like so since the sidebar is going to be dynamic. Inside the sidebar file, we have to check if the sidebar is active. Inside an if statement, let's call the isActiveSidebar function. This function does exactly what we need it to do. It will check if the sidebar is active. You simply pass in the name of the sidebar. In our case, this would be the ID of the sidebar we created, which was juSidebar. Inside this conditional statement, if it returns true, then we'll call a function called dynamic sidebar, which will take care of displaying our sidebar. The only thing we have to pass it is the ID of the sidebar, which is ju_sidebar. Any widgets that are attached to this sidebar will now be displayed. If we did everything right, we should now see our new sidebar appear on the page. Great! Well, not so great because the HTML outputted doesn't really go well with our theme. Let's fix this. Let's take a look at the codex and learn more about the register sidebar function. There are 4 more keys we can set. They are the before widget, before title, and after title keys. These keys allow us to inject HTML into the sidebars. As each name states, it'll insert HTML at some point of each widget created. I'm going to pause the video for a bit and fill out these keys. Alright, now I want you to copy what I have. For the most part, nothing in here is really special. This is just regular HTML with some classes to make our widgets look pretty. It can look a bit confusing because there are so many opening and closing tags. Widgets areas are a bit tricky to create if you create widget areas with so many classes and tags. So when you're designing your site, try and keep the HTML for widgets fairly minimal. I was able to create this through trial and error. The only thing I want you to focus on is the before widget key. You'll notice that I have these random set of characters in the class and ID attributes. These attributes are a bit special because this tag is the container tag for the whole widget. You can think of these random characters as placeholders. There are some widgets out there that might want to add their own classes and set their own ID. By providing these characters, we allow for third-party widgets to do so. We don't have to do anything else. Now, let's refresh the home page and see what our widgets look like now. If yours looks anything like mine, then you're on the right track. It's definitely looking closer to the original template, but we still need to make changes. We've run across a problem you'll find yourself running into when creating widget areas and sidebars. From the beginning, WordPress really tries its best to not dictate exactly what you have to include. You can use a lot of your own CSS, JavaScript, and HTML. However, widgets are special case because the HTML for widgets are generated by WordPress. Anything generated by WordPress tends to be difficult to edit. The HTML and classes loaded don't match the ones with our template. I want you to remember that the template we're using was not built for WordPress. I want to show you it's completely possible to convert an HTML template into a WordPress theme. What we have here is a conflicting HTML and CSS situation. So how do we fix this? We have about 3 options. The first option is to override the HTML for these widgets and make WordPress load these widgets formatted the same way our HTML template does. The second option is to just create our own version of these widgets and have complete control over the HTML and information loaded. The final option is to edit the template CSS file so that they look similar to the HTML template. We will be going with option 3 because that's the simplest of the 3. Trying to override the default WordPress widgets is more difficult than you can imagine. Actually, WordPress doesn't even provide you with a way to override these widgets. This forces you to try and hack the WordPress core. If you have any experience with trying to hack a framework or CMS, then you know it can lead to massive headaches. So we'll just be editing the CSS file so that the widgets look similar to our theme. It's faster and way easier. A lot of developers tend to opt into this route because it's so simple. The second option is also commonly taken. It may seem redundant, but you also give yourself the opportunity to add more options that originally weren't available in the default widgets. It's completely allowed and even recommended. We'll definitely be exploring how to create our own widgets in a future lecture. For now, we'll just go with option 3. As I stated earlier, we won't focus so much on the HTML and CSS since we have the freedom to use whatever frameworks we want. I'm going to actually give you all the CSS all at once. Inside the assets/extra folder, you'll find a number of files that contain some HTML and CSS already created for you. I want you to open the widgets-css.txt file. Copy and paste the contents of this file into the custom.css file inside the assets/css folder. Just paste it into the very bottom of the file. If you're wondering how I did this, all I did was look at the HTML and classes WordPress generated, then I just added my own stylings. It was all trial and error. It is time consuming, but definitely the shortest and easiest route out of the three. If you plan on specializing in WordPress theme development, then this kind of error can be easily avoided by preparing your HTML templates to be WordPress ready. I'm going to refresh the page now. You'll notice that these don't look anything like our template. This is because we're very limited to what we can style and what we can add with WordPress widgets. I promise, when we start creating widgets, we'll definitely recreate our own versions of these widgets with the original template styles and formatting. Just so you know, a lot of commercial shops require that you format these widgets even if you provide better versions of these widgets. In the end, you never know which the user prefers, so it's best to accommodate all scenarios.